Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending this Ohio EPA and Kansas State University Technical Systems to Brownfields webinar. The webinar is Ohio Brownfield Services and Grant Readiness 101. So if you were expecting something else, you might be on the wrong Zoom. But anyway, my name is Amy Yursevich. I am a TAB partner through Kansas State University, which conducts TAB work for Region 5 and some other regions. And I welcome you today. Next slide. Just going to go over some housekeeping ground rules. If you could quickly jot down the number on your screen and the email chsr@ksuedu. That way, if you do have any technical difficulties, you can either email or call, and they'll be hopefully able to get you back on. However, if there are any problems on either end, do rest assured that we are going to record this, and there's a link in the chat box, and you can find that you will have all the presentation slides and the recording. Next slide. And just some Zoom basics. I'm sure many of you are quite well aware of these. You are already muted and your video is turned off, and that will stay off. Those of us who are speaking will pop on, so you get to see us and hear us. And also that gives you a sense of the number of participants, the next right. And of course, the important one is the chat box, number 3, which if you have any questions, feel free to enter those in the chat box. And do make sure that your name, as you probably see on mine, it says Amy Yursevich, does have the same name as you are registered. You will get a certificate of attendance from Kansas State University after this, and we do want to make sure that we have the correct name and can match it up to your email and get that out to you afterwards. Next slide. And again, I did mention you can put questions in the chat box, but also over to kind of the far right, you'll see reactions on your Zoom bar at the bottom, and you can just raise your hand also if you have any questions, and we will call on you. And there's also the same email for any kind of problems. You can also send to questions to chsr@ksuedu. Next slide. And this is the technical assistance to Brownfields communities, and the TAB grants, which are provided, are from the US EPA, and they are provided to different TAB providers in different regions. And they are, you'll hear more about some of the help that we can provide you as we go on today, but they are mainly targeted at communities within the region, not states or other areas. They're to help you out with various brownfield revitalization issues, and in some cases advise you on financial opportunities, maybe help with some grant review, that sort of thing. The services are free, and Kansas State University, along with assisting Region 5, also assists 6, 7, and 8. And then the next page, or slide. And I'm going to pass this off to Roxanne Anderson from Ohio EPA, who's Brownfields coordinator. But essentially, this is our agenda for the day. I will go through a quick Brownfields 101 to get you acclimated, so to speak. And then we're going to talk about some of the redevelopment services and grants that are available, both state and federal, and TAB services. And then then we will have Crystal Lorimer talk about a success story, and then we'll get to the meat of the issue, which is grant capacities, and then talk about some resources. And I'll pass this off to Roxanne.
Thanks, Amy. Welcome everyone again to the Brownfield Services and Grant Readiness 101 webinar. My name is Roxanne Anderson, and I'm a Brownfields coordinator with the Ohio EPA. We're so excited to be able to offer this webinar today. This is our second year doing it, and it's in preparation for some amazing things happening in the Brownfield world and some grant opportunities coming up. We'll be starting off with the Brownfields 101 provided by Amy Ursovich, a Kansas State University TAB partner. After that, Richard Murray, another Brownfield coordinator with the Ohio EPA, Beth Grigsby, a KSU TAB regional manager, and I will go over some free Brownfield services, as well as some other services and grants around the state. Melanie Sorman, a USCPA Brownfields project manager, will then go over the federal Brownfields grants offered every year that open up sometime this fall. After a short break, we'll then get into the meat of the webinar, as Amy said, to go over if you have the capacity to manage a grant, how to get started, and what resources you have access to. For this part of the webinar, Beth Grigsby will be accompanied by a panel of a few of the experts speaking today, as well as Dan Scholker, a Brownfield coordinator with the Ohio EPA, who has over 30 years of experience. To complement the panel discussion, we have a guest speaker, Crystal Lorimore, who is the Executive Director of the Belmont County Community Improvement Corporation. She is here to discuss her journey in getting her feet wet with Brownfield grants from where she started to where she is now. We're hopeful that the information provided today will give you the tools to move forward in your Brownfield project, no matter what stage you're in. And with that, I will turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you. Thank you for those wonderful introductions, Roxanne, and we'll move on to the next slide, which, as I promised, is Brownfields 101. So just a quick primer on what Brownfields are, how they came to be, and so on and so forth. Next slide. So we'll start out with the legal definitions of Brownfields. You can read those for yourselves. However, what I wanted to point out in both the federal and the state definition is there's some things in common. So essentially, it's going to be the same sort of property. And what is in common is the property. They both speak to property or real property. They talk about redevelopment of these properties being complicated. And they talk about either potential or actually known contamination. Next slide. And that takes us to more of a layman's term definition. It's a property that's difficult to develop because it's contaminated, or it might be contaminated. Generally, these sites are going to have low to moderate contamination. We're not talking about Superfund sites. We're talking about sites that may fall under the Superfund law, which we'll talk about in a minute. But generally, they're not a highly contaminated site. And there's a number of different things. They can be hazardous chemicals, they can be asbestos, they can be lead paint, they can be petroleum, all kinds of different contaminants or dangerous substances. Next slide. Brownfields, maybe there's a lot of them that probably make sense if you look through this list really quickly. Some you may not have thought of. Second bullet point, churches and schools. That might not first come to mind. However, churches and schools often have boilers, which means asbestos, and asbestos it puts you in a Brownfields category and requires a special type of cleanup. Shooting ranges. Well, that's lead shot back in the day. So you could have a lot of lead in an area that might have been an old shooting range. Hospitals. Same sort of thing as schools and churches, where you have asbestos issues, but you may also have radioactive chemicals and that sort of thing. So all kinds of different issues, and any of the types of properties listed here could be a brownfield. Next slide. So why does contamination cause so much complication? Why can't you just go in and clean it up? That seems to make the most sense. However, it gets a little more complicated. Next slide. And the reason it gets complicated is because of CERCLA, which is also the Superfund law. That acronym, it basically, is the acronym for the law that was passed when we had like Love Canal and we had the Cuyahoga River burning and those sorts of things, where you had extremely contaminated sites. looking at this picture, barrels of probably hazardous waste. And, you know, things where large swaths of property were probably highly contaminated and needed to be cleaned up. And this law made sense under those circumstances. And what the liability scheme is, and liability is the key issue here, is joint and several. So the liability isn't always distributed equally. It's generally going to be focused on the people that are no longer or are not bankrupt and are still here and may have some solvency. So it may impose more of a problem for them. Strict, it's not based on fault. This is based on chain of title. If you happen to end up in the chain of title, purchasing this, thinking it was a property that was okay, you could be responsible. And it's wide in scope. And that's not just, you know, all kinds of different contaminants, as I discussed before, but also contaminants that may have migrated in groundwater and other media like that. And then we'll go on to the next slide. So it's the perception of contamination. So we don't really know when we walk on a property that hasn't been looked at or investigated, you know, what's really there. There's a lot of things that might be there. So, and the only way to tell that is to conduct an investigation. And once that investigation is done and we know what's going on and we can handle that, in most cases, the stigma is gone and we can return that property to productive use. Next slide. So this is essentially the Brownfields law. It was signed into law in 2002. It applies to prospective purchasers, contiguous landowners, and others, basically people that didn't cause the contamination. As long as they're going to perform some due diligence, which usually involves a phase 1 investigation, we'll talk about that in a minute, and maybe some sampling in certain issues, and they're not hindering any, like if the party that is responsible for the contamination is going to be brought on the property to take care of it, you don't want to hinder that. You're going to get liability protection from the federal government. Also you will be eligible for certain types of funding for assessments and cleanup. And that has extended not just to the prospective purchasers and contiguous property owners, but with the passage of the amendments in 2018, the eligible entities now include non-for-profits. Next slide. So this is the Brownfield redevelopment process. We first start out with planning, then we move to investigating, and then we move to redevelopment finally. Next slide. So this is part of the planning stage. You are going to want to identify your brownfields and maybe develop an inventory. And you're going to want to look in various different places and ask different people. So stakeholders in your community, look to your comprehensive plans, your revitalization plans that your community has developed. You want to look at the gateways to your community or gateways to the things like tourism attractions. Also tax delinquent properties. People have gone bankrupt or for whatever reason have no longer paid taxes on their properties. Those are often a good opportunity to do some investigation and redevelopment. And often those properties have been passed on because of the delinquency to the community. Next slide. So who identifies these? Actually, it's you. It's not the EPA. It's not the Ohio EPA. It's not anybody else but you. If you're thinking EPA or Ohio EPA, those are entities that actually look for properties that are more contaminated in most cases, and they may be starting enforcement against them to make a cleanup happen. So it's really you and your expertise and your community's expertise and some of the other options that I mentioned before that help you develop your brownfields inventory or identify brownfields in your community. Next slide. So redevelopment goals, you want to set a vision for the site or the region, and you're going to look at what the economic needs are, community needs, environmental needs in doing that. And you want to do this with your community, and you want to set goals and how you're going to achieve them. Do you need funding? Do you need to involve other partners? Do you need to involve the previous owner or an owner? That sort of thing. And then adjust and revise your plans as needed. So as you have more community engagement, as the assessment goes along, you may be revising your plans. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about the investigation, which is the next step. The first one is a ASTM phase 1, and that is a non-intrusive investigation. You're basically looking at historical records. You're talking to Roxanne and Dan and their crew about state and local records, and possibly federal records. You're doing a visual inspection of the site. You're not doing any sampling. You're looking at the history of the site and what might be on the site based on that history, which we usually identify as recognized environmental conditions, or RECs, R-E-C-S. Next slide. Move on to the phase 2. So you have these RECs where, where there was likely or possible contamination. Maybe things leaked out, maybe you have storm drains where things may have migrated, that sort of thing. You're going to take those and say, basically the phase 2 is going to say, are they there? Sampling will help identify that. What's there? Where is it? Maybe the REC indicated one place and it may be someplace totally different or nearby, just because historical records aren't always accurate. So then you'll move into the characterization phase, your sampling. How much is there after you've already identified the upper ones? The extent and the delineation of that contamination, and that may require more than one sampling round to identify how far it's gone and where it's gone. And then you start looking at, if cleanup's needed, what's feasible. Do we put a cap on it? Do we clean it up? Do we remove the dirt? So on and so forth. And then whatever, depending on what's economically and practically feasible, you'll come up with a cleanup plan. Move on. Next slide. And then you start getting into cleanup, and that can be anything from removing the soil, or a soil management plan, which is like, don't dig below 4 feet or 6 feet if there might be contamination below that's capped with that soil. Groundwater cleanup, there's different methods of going about groundwater cleanup. You can demolish and rehab. At that point in time, you need to get specialists in if you have asbestos or lead-based paint. And engineering controls, so you might have a vapor mitigation system, so things might not get into the basement if it's a volatile chemical and it's in the groundwater. And you might put a concrete or cement or asphalt cap on some soil if it's contaminated. So different things like that. And institutional controls, and at least in Ohio, are deed restrictions, and in some other cases they may be zoning changes. Next slide. And you're going to read with the redevelopment, you're going to loop back. We talked about it at the beginning or earlier, and based on the information that you get from your phase 1 and then phase 2, take a look at your vision. Maybe you're going to have to change what you wanted. Maybe you wanted a park there, but maybe you're going to need to put a concrete cap on that and make it a parking lot for your historic downtown area. So there may be changes that need to be made. And with that, you'll set goals and plans to achieve them like you would originally. What kind of funding, what kind of operations are going to be needed to actually do this cleanup. And then it's kind of a circular sort of thing as you adjust and you revise your plans to make sure that you can redevelop this property in a useful way and in a way that makes sense for the contamination that is on the property. Next slide. So how do you get started with all this? Gets kind of complicated. You got a lot of assessment to do and outreach to do and things like that. You're going to need resources. And that's what we're going to talk about next. And with that, next slide. Here's my contact information, but I'm going to pass this on to Richard Murray, who's going to start by talking about getting your feet wet. And along with Roxanne and Beth Grigsby, we'll be talking about some of the different free services and grants that may be available to you to get started on these brownfields revitalization projects. And with that, I'll pass it on to Richard.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. My name is Richard Murray. As Amy said, I'll be sharing a brief overview of Ohio EPA's Targeted Brownfield Program and a Voluntary Action Program, which is commonly referred as TAB or VAT. Next slide. Next slide. So my goal is that all of you can walk away with the knowledge of the TAB and VAT programs we provide, their eligibility requirements, and the technical services that we offer. Next slide. I'm going to kick off the discussion with the info on Ohio EPA's very own Targeted Brownfields program. So what does the TAB program really do? What is our purpose? The TAB program was established to assist community leaders and property owners with their goals of transforming underutilized properties into economic and community assets. Next slide. And as Amy mentioned, brownfields are a property where expansion, reuse, or redevelopment may be complicated with hazardous substances, pollutants, or the perceived contamination, which includes factories, auto services, dry cleaners, and former gas stations. Next slide. So what does the TAB program really do? This specific program provides environmental assessments at no cost. You can apply for the TVA funding throughout the year on a rolling basis. Annually, more than $1 million in services provided. And some of the assessments that we typically fund are phase 1 and asbestos surveys, which I will talk about later in my presentation. And the programs include certain prereqs for eligibility, like phase 1 assessments for the Ohio EPA's Voluntary Action Program. Next slide. Now that we know about the program, let's discuss the crucial first step is eligibility. So regarding to the applicant, it must be a government or a nonprofit entity. They cannot be the cause or contributor to the suspected contamination, and they do not need to own the property. Additionally, the property owner must grant legal access to the applicant, Ohio EPA, and our contractors. And taking a look at the property itself, it must be a brownfield. And residential properties can be eligible, but only if there's more than 4 units. Also, as Amy mentioned earlier, it cannot be under CERCLA or any national priority list. Next slide. So once we determine if your project is eligible, we can offer our services, which include a phase 1, which is recommended prior to purchasing property. Additionally, any prereqs for the VAT program, and asbestos survey, which is required for demolition or renovation of a structure. Geophysical surveys, which help determine if there's underground storage tanks on your property. And we offer market analysis, which results will indicate economically feasible reuse options for your brownfield sites, and brownfield inventories, which provide detailed information on brownfield properties along with steps to help you successfully navigate through the process of reusing designated brownfields in Ohio. And then finally, vision planning. So vision planning, which is like brownfields revitalization plan based on your community's vision. And so to clarify, this list on the screen is only but a few of the TVA services we provide. You can see the full list on our website, which I provide at the end of my presentation with URL, and you don't have to worry about copying down the slides will be available after our webinar. And overall, these free services can work in collaboration in preparing for the project's next step or sharing costs for a larger project. The TPA is non-competitive, again, on a rolling basis. And if you don't know where you need to go, the TPA program is a great first step for getting your feet wet. Next slide. Now I'll be sharing a brief overview of Ohio EPA's VAP program. I hinted to the connection earlier between the TPA's program and VAP earlier in my presentation, which included the phase 1 assessment, which is a prereq for Ohio's VAP program. So what is the VAP program? Well, the VAP program is to minimize the governmental red tape and maximize the resources and expertise in the private sector with the goal of the covenant not to sue. And what is the covenant not to sue? The covenant not to sue protects the property owner or operator from being legally responsible to the state of Ohio for further investigation and cleanup. This protection applies only when the property is used and maintained in the same manner as the covenant was issued. Next slide. With that being said, why is the voluntary action program important? Why should you apply? Well, the VAP program gives property owners and volunteers an opportunity to determine their end use, whether it's apartments, parks, single-family homes, or for commercial industrial use. The VAP has requirements and specific standards to meet those property goals. Next slide. So if questions arise while completing your VAP site work or prior to issuing the NFA letter, you can come to us to ask questions or review items that might be used to support the issuance of an NFA letter. And we both offer paid and grant funded assistance. The VAP grant funding is available to cover some costs associated with the VAP technical assistance. And some of those examples would be guidance on the technical or legal issues related to the NFA letter or pre-NFA documents that need a review. And this is all before the issuance of the NFA. And the Brownfield program can also fill the data gaps that may be encountered, like the additional phase 2 activities. This way, your Brownfield remediation funding can be reserved for cleanup activities at the property. And looking ahead at the 300 sites that were awarded through the Ohio Department of Development's Brownfield remediation, we anticipate many of those sites will end up using and pursuing the covenant not to sue. Next slide. So when you decide to take a property through the VAP, you'll need to work with a certified professional or CP. What is a certified professional? Where do you find them? This person will have the experience and qualifications required by the VAP to take a project through the entire process. You can find our list of CPs on the Ohio EPA website. And when the work is completed at the VAP property, a final report is compiled by the CP and then submitted to the agency for review. This report is called the No Further Action Letter, or NFA. This is a concise report based on the hours of work, completing the environmental assessments like the phase 1 or asbestos removal. And once Ohio EPA receives an NFA letter, we begin setting up our review team. And if we have any comments on the NFA letter or need additional information, we'll discuss it with the CP, and then they'll respond to our comments with an addendum. And this addendum becomes like attached to the NFA. And then once the NFA letter meets the VAP applicable standards, our VAP team then recommends a CNS to be signed by the director. And that's just a very brief overview and roadmap of a CNS. And next slide. So concluding my portion of the webinar, I also included a future webinars and shops that might be of use to you. And you can also reach out to myself, Roxanne, or Dan for any tab or questions about Brownfields. And then for the VAP program, you can also reach out to any of us about those questions. And then I'm going to pass off to our next speaker, Beth.
Hi, Richard. Thank you. I've got a quick question for you before you're.
Of course.
So you need a certified professional for the VAP program.
Yes.
Need a certified professional for the technical assistance pieces that you were talking about. How do you enter into those programs? The inventory, the visioning.
Well, for just starting the project, you can consult the certified professional on that end to gather more information on that front, because he's going to be like the professional that we've certified to manage the project and then submits the NFA letter. We have that list on the website that you can contact. You can just Google like CP Ohio EPA and it'll be the first hyperlink. You can click that and it'll provide a list of all our CPs that we have available. And you just reach out to one of them. It's like, hey, I have a project that I want to discuss with you. You can set up a call or meeting with them.
Okay.
And I also want to interject. I'm sorry. You mentioned the Brownfield inventory and vision planning and stuff like that, Beth.
Yes.
Those are through our TBA program, not the VAP program.
Okay.
And so those you would just reach out to us or fill out a regular TBA application, which is available online, or we can make the link provided to you. And those are free services, whereas the VAP program is not necessarily a free service, but the technical assistance for the VAP program is, and there's also an application for that.
Great. That's what I was wondering. Also, we do have a question from Mark Hill. He says we have a property that has a phase 1 and phase 2, so they're in the due diligence phase, currently owned by a public agency. Who can help us next with the next steps?
So with that, I'm going to say we're probably going to cover a few of those things with the types of resources that are available. And then we can connect with you after the webinar and kind of go over where exactly you're at, what type of phase 1 and phase 2 you have, and where you're trying to take the property as to what grant or resources are available to you, because it's very project specific. But we are going to touch on a lot of things that happen after you get to that point.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'll get on with mine then so we can move it forward. So welcome, Technical Assistance to Brownfields. This is in partnership what we're doing today with Ohio EPA. Actually, Ohio EPA has led this particular webinar. And what I want to talk to you about are the free services that you can get in touch. Our application process is give us a call and or email us, and the contacts, you'll have all the contacts at the end of the entire presentation. So let's go with what is TAB and how can TAB help you? Next slide. So we're different than the Ohio Technical Assistance Program in that we are funded by the US EPA through a cooperative agreement. And this is a national program. It's across all states in the United States. I'm representing Kansas State University. We assist communities in regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. As I mentioned earlier, services are provided free and tailored to specific needs. So if there's a way that you can kind of leverage our services with Ohio EPA services, I think you're golden. You can get quite a bit done. I'll talk more about what that is, but we do webinars, workshops, e-tools. We have e-tools like the BIT inventory tool and the Tab Easy, which is a great tool if you're applying for a federal grant, the federal EPA grant, and other online resources. Next slide, please. And so community and planning and brownfields redevelopment, you've really got to start thinking outside the box now. Things have changed so much. They've been changing for a long time. And so many communities that used to have that great that great company in the center of their town, it's no longer there. They couldn't keep up with whatever the economy was, or people just changed hands, or they were sucked into another great big huge company. So what is going on with the changing land use patterns? You may not want that big company, manufacturing company now in the middle of your community. How does it reflect the changing real estate market, changing economy? Think about your community. What are your major problems? What are your opportunities? And what are your priorities? And how does the site reuse plan fit into that? And how does existing contamination impact the site reuse opportunities? Next slide, please. So you have a friend in TAB. Just always give us a call, as I mentioned, and there's email me or call me or call Amy. And we can help you identify and inventory brownfields. And I think a lot of times what we do are more those softer skills of educating your community on what brownfields are. It could be your town council. It could be your board for a regional planning commission. I mean, just talking about brownfields and the opportunities that you have, and it goes hand in hand with strategic planning and redevelopment visioning. And as I mentioned, you know, synergistic efforts here between Ohio EPA and the TAB program is a great way to get started. We do economic feasibility, highest and best use market analysis, again, educational workshops, community outreach and input. We'll talk more about that in a few. Identifying funding sources. So you may have federal resources you could tap into. Many times you really want to go with the state resources. It's faster moving. Things will move faster for you with the state. Or you may be looking to other funding sources like foundations, that type of thing. So that's something that we can help you with. We review US EPA Brownfield grant applications. Doesn't mean that we write the grant for you. Can't do that, but we can certainly give you some great tips on how to improve and make your application more competitive. Helping finding and evaluating consultants. You could have certified professionals, but maybe you want to put a call out for the qualifications of what those certified professionals can bring to you, just for your own use and your own information. Review of plans and technical reports. That's something we do, but when it comes to technical reports, we really rely on Dan and Richard and Roxanne for that with the Ohio EPA. Next slide, please. E-tools. Go online, www.ksutab.org. There's a lot there. We'll be adding more. We'll be adding more webinars and actual, recorded trainings, that type of thing. The Brownfields inventory tool, the Tab Easy grant writing tool, lots of resources. Next slide, please. Here's the BIT inventory tool. This is a great tool. If you, it actually can be used outside of inventories. It's a great way to track where your project is. And if you work for a municipality or a town, a county, you may start a project and then it stops for one reason or another. You can be logging everything you've done in, and over time, you'll have a great accumulation of the records on that particular property. What were the starts and stops? Who are the owners? What type of reports do you need for that? Next slide, please. And it stores and manages site data. You can map with this, like a Google map with, once you put your sites in, your addresses in, you can upload your photos and documents, funding summaries. It has an acres interface if you happen to have an EPA Brownfields grant. Next slide, please. Tab Easy grant writing template. If you're considering that US EPA Brownfields grant, this is a great way to start. You can start this now. Take a look at it. You can take a look at sample grant applications, what's happened in the, over time. How are other communities handling the writing of those grants? Next slide, please. And if you do get into the EPA Brownfields grants, it basically, just to give you an idea, every grant is very specific. And so there's assessment, but now there's also coalition assessment. And the configuration for these grants can be different, which means a lot when you're trying to write a competitive grant. Next slide, please. And again, this is what it looks like when you go on, start a new grant application. You can test it, you can play with it, you can have others join your efforts. You can have a team writing a grant application. You just have to give them permissions to do so. Helpful hints are the best. They're written by pros and very helpful. Next slide, please. Additional tab resources for grant writing. We will do draft application reviews. I think we've had some great successes here in Ohio, actually, on some grants that we have reviewed. We do the webinars and workshops. We do grant resources, as mentioned earlier, on things, successful grants handpicked by EPA for your review. Next slide, please. BIT, I think I mentioned that, but it's also, you can do this, there's a mobile app for that too. And so if you ever want to play with this and you fumble around, you know how it is with different data management tools, you gotta kind of know the tricks. Let us know, we'll walk you through it. We've got some folks that really know this inside and out, and they can help you input your data and use it and know how to use it. Next slide, please. Tab assistance to communities and tribes, community engagement. There's so many ways to engage the community. This is an example of what they did in Michigan. They basically had an Earth Day event. And they advertised it, and then that's when they brought their plan about Ox Creek to the people that came to the Earth Day. There was a cleanup as well associated with that. That's strategic planning. We have partners that are very well versed in this type of thing, with architects, great finance people that can do economic feasibility, real estate people. These are companies that are very well respected, and we can assist you with that. We can assist you with redevelopment goals and facilitating stakeholder meetings. Next slide, please. And this is a list of the KSU tab and partners resources. As I mentioned, this is a laundry list, but you might want to take a look at it. There might be some things that you want to do. Let's say you're considering solar reuse. We do have a company, Rocky Mountain Institute, that's a partner, and they assist communities with the feasibility of bringing something like that into your community, and who does what. Should it be the utility? Should it be you? Who should own the land? Who should lease the land? Next slide, please. And now on to Roxanne with common brownfield funding sources in Ohio. Take it away, Roxanne.
Thank you, Beth. In addition to Ohio EPA's TBA and VAT programs that Richard went over earlier, I'm going to go over some free technical assistance options, as well as other state funding opportunities. Like everything that we go over today, if you think that one of these programs is a good fit for you, but you're not sure, I'll say it a million times, please feel free to reach out to us at any time and we can assist you. We're a great first stop. Next. Ohio EPA provides technical assistance to help local governments and private individuals navigate the brownfield process, which can be very complicated and intimidating. We provide collaboration meetings to discuss specific projects and help sort out funding options. We provide training, like this webinar today, to provide education on the Brownfields process and funding. Our Voluntary Action Program, which is Ohio's formal voluntary cleanup program, will provide free technical review of documents upon request by a community. And as I mentioned before, those applications are available online. Technical reviews can help communities navigate complex projects and the rules involved, as well as ensure cleanups are protective. Our technical assistance can also be used as match towards other state funding if needed, when you need a match for a grant application. Next. One of the great things about the world of brownfields is that we are interconnected. We collaborate and partner with other government agencies to help set up a project for success. We are continuously learning about the funding options that are available both on the front end of a project, such as the assessments needed, and on the back end of a project, such as the end use and economic development options. We also leverage our program to partner with other agencies to share costs for larger projects or provide a match for other grant projects as well. Bottom line is we are always looking for ways to help communities to get a project through to completion, and we are always open to new approaches. Next. The Ohio Department of Development has a long history of providing funding for community development and assisting local governments. The abandoned gas station cleanup program is very popular, helping local governments reduce the blight caused by vacant gas stations. To be eligible, the site must be vacant and have no viable responsible party to complete the cleanup. The most common grant through the program is the Assessment Corrective Action Grant. Up to $250,000 can be requested to remove the tanks, conduct buster assessments called a Tier 1 and Tier 2, and complete any necessary soil or groundwater cleanup and demolish any structures. No more than $100,000 of the grant can be spent on the assessment activities, and a VAP Phase 1 is required for the program. This is to make sure that the impacts from activities not related to the tanks and dispensers are also cleaned up. These areas often include old hydraulic lifts and auto repair areas from service stations, for example. The grant can also handle asbestos abatement prior to demolition or reuse of any structures on the property. Next. Occasionally, a property will have significant impacts to soil and groundwater that require extensive removal of contamination. The cleanup and remediation grant through the abandoned gas station program provides up to $500,000 to clean up these projects. However, buster assessment activities are not eligible and consulting costs are capped at 15%. Next. Jobs Ohio is a private nonprofit corporation that administers many redevelopment incentives for Ohio. They have a variety of grants and loans to help end users transform property, including brownfields. The revitalization program can assess and clean up brownfields in preparation for end users and job creation in targeted industry sectors. They provide direct assistance for Phase 2 assessments with up to $200,000 in grant money, and they may grant up to $1 million for cleanup, but that's often coupled with a loan. Jobs Ohio will provide revitalization loans up to $5 million to cover up to 75% of eligible project costs. Eligible costs include demolition, asbestos lead paint abatement, environmental cleanup, site preparation, renovation, and infrastructure. Each project is evaluated based on the amount of funds invested by the end user and the certainty of its completion. This is a great option if you have an interested developer that will be providing jobs to your community. Next. We're now going to look at the Brownfield remediation program with the Ohio Department of Development. This program made its debut in 2021, and all funding rounds were closed by July 2022. If you have not heard yet, there's a strong possibility that this program will be refunded by the state, but it's not guaranteed yet. And in the case that this may happen, I'm going to briefly go over how the program worked when it came out in 2021, even though there's no indication that the guidelines will remain the same. So just take this with a grain of salt and with the possibilities. The state funds at ODOD were on a first come, first served basis. They were not necessarily competitive, but you needed certain capabilities as a grant holder, which we will get to after Melanie talks about the US EPA grants. The Brownfield remediation program offered up to $300,000 for assessment grants and up to $10 million for cleanup grants. A 25% match was required, and both US EPA grants and Ohio TBA program grants can be used towards this requirement as a match. For the first few rounds, $1 million was set aside for each county, which required no match, and after which the remaining unclaimed funds were rolled back into the main grant. Next slide. Sorry. A federal program I want to talk about today is the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. The Interagency Working Group is a newer collaboration effort that consists of 12 member agencies across the federal government to help support coal, oil, and gas and power plant communities as they transition. Next slide. The working group focuses on getting the best funding options to the communities who need it. They do this by targeting 4 main areas: infrastructure, environmental cleanup, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. With infrastructure, available funding helps to provide reliable broadband, good roads, clean water, modern sewer systems, and affordable local transportation. While a lot of cleanup funding comes from the US EPA, which you will learn about shortly, other cleanup funding can help support land and industrial transformation, including the deployment of low carbon technologies at sites from former power plants and industrial facilities programs to remediate abandoned mines, orphaned wells, and brownfields. Communities also deserve thriving small businesses that drive innovation, including the provision of support for them from community development, financial institutions, nonprofits, and innovation hubs, as well as support for training programs to align their workforces with actual industry growth in each key region. Next slide. An example of one of these agencies that is part of the Interagency Working Group is the Economic Development Administration. The EDA has a competitive grant program that focuses on impacted coal communities and can assist with economic diversification, job creation, capital investment, workforce development, and reemployment opportunities. Next. I highly encourage you to learn more by visiting energycommunities.gov, signing up for email updates, and by engaging in the working group social media channels. Next. Before I hand you off to Melanie, I want to offer you our contact information as well as some good resources on our website. We have the Ohio Brownfields page, and we also have a training page with up-to-date opportunities for workshops and webinars like this one. Again, don't feel free the need to copy any of this down. You'll have the slides available. Next. We also have an email subscription option where you can sign up to get emails regarding new funding, application deadlines, and webinar opportunities. You can take your phone and scan this right on the screen. It'll take you directly to the website where you can sign up. The subscription is under the Department of Environmental Response and Revitalization, and then Brownfield interested parties. Now you can sign up for anything within the Ohio EPA, but I highly recommend at the very least signing up for Brownfield interested parties. Thank you so much for listening. We can now take some time for any questions if there are any. Otherwise, I will pass this off to Melanie Sorman.
Hi, Melanie, are you having technical problems? Oh, there you are. Hi there.
Sorry about that. I was waiting for my slide to show up.
Oh, sorry about that. Next slide.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so like Roxanne just said, I'm Melanie Sorman. I work for the US EPA as a Brownfields project manager, and I'm in the Region 5 office. I'm in Chicago today, but I do a lot of work in Ohio as well. And so my presentation today will be to go over the different types of grants that our Brownfields division offers, and I'll talk about whether these grants may be the right fit for you, for your organization or not. So next slide. So there's a few considerations you should take before jumping into applying for a US EPA grant, either for your first time or the first time in a long time. And so if you've got brownfields out there and you need to have them assessed, what is the best route for you? Do you even want to think about US EPA funding? So first you should consider how many brownfields you have, because if there's just a few, then Ohio EPA's TBA program is probably your best option. But if you've got a whole bunch, then you may want to listen to this presentation and think about coming in for a US EPA grant. Does your organization have the knowledge and capacity to manage a grant? If the answer to this is no, then especially if you only have 1 or 2 sites that you're thinking about, then I would touch base with Ohio EPA and let them do it. If you feel a little more confident that you can manage a grant on your own or with some assistance, then you might want a US EPA grant. The last thing is your timeline. It takes about a year to get federal funding. So if you've got a longer timeline, the US EPA might be okay for you. But if you really want to get something done soon, right away, you need to talk to Ohio EPA. So next slide, please. So now I'm just going to go over what our typical grant funding offerings are, and these are all based on last year's offerings, and these do change from year to year. This is that MARC Brownfields grants that was mentioned in the other slides before. So MARC stands for the multi-purpose, assessment, RLF, and cleanup. And those are our 4 main types of grants. Assessment grants have kind of 2 subtypes. If you're a single entity, you can apply for up to $500,000. If you are applying as a coalition, a group, you can apply for up to $1 million of funding. Cleanup grants have 3 tiers of funding. I will get into that on another slide. And then for this talk, I'm not really going to delve into multi-purpose and RLF grants, because for multi-purpose, you have to be a more sophisticated grantee to manage a multi-purpose grant. And for this audience, I think it's better for you guys to go for either assessment or cleanup grants. And then for the RLF, the revolving loan fund, we're not offering that next funding period. So that's why I won't be going into the RLF. Next slide, please. So the bipartisan infrastructure law. This is really pertinent to this audience. If you aren't aware of what the bipartisan infrastructure law is, or bill for short, it is an investment of $1.5 billion to be used by brownfields programs to fund brownfields redevelopment projects, and it all has to be used within the next 5 years. And the purpose is to revitalize as many communities across the US as possible. So the bipartisan infrastructure law has increased focus on reaching out to new and lower capacity communities. So kind of the target for this webinar. And it really wants us to work on community involvement. And US EPA grants have always had a type of like community involvement involved, but there's more focus here with the new law. So an example is there's this use of community liaisons in assessment and multi-purpose grants. And then we are also really focusing on cleanup funding. So it's good to get your sites assessed now and then come in for cleanup funding when you're ready. So that could be just like a year from now. Next slide. So, okay, I'm going to go into each of these different types of grants, starting with community-wide assessment grants. And there's kind of more information on all of these slides than I'm really going to delve deeper into. I just wanted to have this information here for everyone, just so you can have it as a reference, since you guys will be getting these slides after the fact. So earlier I mentioned that there were 2 types of assessment grants. This is the community-wide assessment grant where you can apply for up to $500,000 per award. These grants are for a 4-year project period, meaning you have 4 years to complete your work. And this year, just to give you kind of an idea of success rates for our grants, we awarded a total of $53.6 million between 110 grantees. And of this, 57% of those funds were granted to new grantees. So don't think that you don't have a chance when you're applying for a US EPA grant for the first time. And down here is just how we define a new grantee. So that's either an entity that has never received an EPA Brownfields Mark grant, or it's someone that maybe they did have a grant in the past, but it has been closed since 2014 or earlier. Next slide, please. For this grant, you need to identify a target area. So you just have to have a specific area in mind that is in really big need of brownfields redevelopment funding. There is $200,000 allowable to be spent per site, although you can use it for multiple sites. And then you can use this funding for these things here. So assessments, that's your phase 1, your phase 2s, looking through historical contamination, maybe taking water and soil samples. Planning, such as putting together a cleanup plan for redevelopment. And you can also use it for associated community engagement. So that could be something as simple as holding community meetings to go over brownfields community needs. And when you have a community-wide assessment grant, I really want to stress that, well, first of all, you're required to hire a consultant to do the technical work. But I want to make a point that you can really use your consultant, especially if you are low capacity or new to brownfields. They can be your technical expert and really help you out if you're not as familiar with brownfields as you'd like to be. You can always reach out to the US EPA, Ohio EPA, or TAB, but make sure you really take advantage of your consultants because they're there to help you. Next slide. So this is the second type of assessment grant. So this is the coalition assessment grant. The key to this is that you can apply for more money. So that's up to $1 million you can be awarded. It also has a 4-year project period, and you can use this grant funding also for assessments, planning, and that community engagement, just like the other community-wide assessment grant. And then I wanted to point out here the success rates. We had a very high success rate this year for the coalition grant. So we awarded a total of $17.7 million across 19 grantees. 19 awards doesn't sound very high compared to the 110 for the community-wide assessment grant, but we had a much smaller pool of people apply for the coalition grant. So do keep in mind that success rates change from year to year, but I think that's something to think about. Next slide, please. So coalition grants, just a little more info about them is you're supposed to have 1 lead member in charge and 2 to 4 non-lead members as well. So this lead member has to be one of these big experienced entities like the ones listed here. So that's the state, county, a tribe, regional council, or a group of general purpose units of governments. And then your non-lead members have to be lower capacity or just inexperienced grantees. And remember, those new grantees are ones that have never had that Brownfields grant or was closed in 2014 or earlier. And then again, this is all because of that infrastructure law. We're just trying to reach out to the low capacity and new grantees, especially with these coalition grants. And the reason why in parentheses next to the lead members is why it says land banks for fiscal year 24 is because land banks were not included as being eligible to be a lead member last year, but it was a suggestion made to headquarters that they be a lead member for next year. So maybe they'll count as a lead member this new offering year. So just in case anyone in the audience is from a land bank, that may be applicable to you. So next slide, please. Here are just a few more facts about coalition grants. We're encouraging nonprofits to be a non-lead member because the nonprofits a lot of the times have a lot closer ties to the community than, say, a governmental agency does. So that's why it's strongly encouraged that these nonprofits be a non-lead member. We're really trying to promote that community involvement. And then here's just some more nuts and bolts. With a coalition grant, you must assess at least 2 sites in each member's geographic area. The coalition target areas may not overlap with one another, and you can assess sites outside of the target area, but you must identify how you're going to select those sites, and they must be similar to your target area in terms of demographics. So next slide, please. Okay, lastly, I wanted to go over the cleanup grants very briefly. So there are these 3 tiers of funding you can apply for, either up to $500,000, between $500,000 and $1 million, or between $1 million and $2 million. And because of that bipartisan infrastructure law funding, there is no cost share requirement. There's also a 4-year project period. And again, here's some more success rates from last year. We awarded 36 awards for a total of $18.2 million. 28 of those were for the $500,000 tier, and 8 of those were for the $1 million tier. So next slide, please. So these are just the requirements of the cleanup grants. So you must own the site by the date of your submitted application. You must also have completed all appropriate inquiry on your site. And here's the ASTM standard for reference if you need to look into exactly what's included in all appropriate inquiry. For this 3rd bullet point here, sites that previously received cleanup grants were not eligible in fiscal year 23, but now in fiscal year 24, which is this year, that may change. And then for this last bullet, in addition to getting a letter from your state's environmental agency, that agency, which is Ohio EPA, they must also state that your site has been adequately assessed, meaning that your site is ready for cleanup and that it doesn't need further assessment prior to starting a cleanup. It basically means that they believe you have enough information to write your remedial action plan. Next slide, please. So then for multi-purpose grants, I'll just kind of breeze through this because chances are for most people in this audience, you're not going to be interested in applying for a multi-purpose grant this time around, but I did want to make you aware of their availability. They are something that we offer. So the multi-purpose grants can be used for planning activities, assessments, and cleanups again, and you get up to $800,000 per award. It is a 5-year project period. And again, there's no cost share requirement. And to give you some success rate examples, we awarded 18 grants for a total of $17.8 million. Next slide. And so if you do apply for a multi-purpose grant, you cannot apply for the following listed here. So that's a community-wide assessment grant, coalition assessment grant, or a cleanup grant. And the multi-purpose grant emphasizes completing actions in a target area as opposed to spreading it around your whole county. You really have to focus on a specific target area that you mentioned. And then here are some of the minimum requirements, which are requirements of this once you get the award, and they're pretty easy to accomplish once you start doing the work. So you need to complete a phase 2 during the project period, 1 site cleanup, and you also need to come up with a reuse plan for at least one of your sites. Next slide, please. So that's all I had. Here's just some more resources for you all. This first bullet here is for a webinar, a 2-day webinar for grant writing tips. I really recommend you go to that if you're new to grant applications. They are very competitive, very tough to kind of break into, but don't be discouraged. Definitely apply every year if you can. And then here, you've just got some of my contact information. That's my email. My name is not Carla Ocker. I got these slides from her, but my name is Melanie Sorman. And yeah, here's some more information. You can look back on these slides once they're shared with you. And so, yeah, I can open it up to questions, or I believe we have a break coming up as well.
So let's, hopefully we've gotten questions in the chat. I've been watching, I haven't seen anything. But if you could go to the, Melanie, that was great. Thank you, especially in a pinch. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next slide here. Okay, so we're taking a little coffee break. Okay, I think we'll start with our next presentation. Are you ready for a grant? But there is a question in the chat box that and Roxanne answered it, but Roxanne, do you mind just giving a little bit more detail about the lead-based surveys?
Yeah, I mean, the lead-based surveys are covered under our TBA program, as are our asbestos surveys. We usually do that as part of a phase 2 assessment. So after you get your phase 1, which is covered, depending on the building and what the reuse is going to be, depends on whether or not you need a lead-based survey. But if it is needed or required, it is covered under the TBA program.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Well, are you ready for a grant? And this is actually the brainchild of Carla Ocker. She kind of came up with the approach to the buckets presentation on capacity to manage a grant. So next slide, please. And so we all know Brownfield grants can be, wonderful when a community is trying to revitalize. But Brownfield grants also require knowledge and certain experience or capacities to manage the grant properly. And one thing you need to think back on, and Melanie touched on this too, what is the scope of your Brownfield program, or your problem? What is the scope? Do you have one site, or do you have a corridor of sites? Or do you have sites spread across an area, like a region or a county? Can you get site access? You can do assessment type activities given that you have site access to go on to a property, but you really will need to own that property once you get into a cleanup phase. So site access, and will you be able eventually to have control of the property? What type of work are you going to need? This is something to think about. Do you need an assessment? Do you need cleanup? Do you need something else? So those are the things. And when Roxanne mentioned, give us a call, give them a call, brainstorm on things, give us a call. We're always ready to talk, and especially the education part if you need. How does timing impact your project? Federal grants may not be the fix for you if you've got a developer or something happening relatively soon with your project. So you think about applying for a grant in this next fall. Let's say if you do a federal grant, you're not going to see any funding until the following October, which would be 2024, October. Next slide, please. So what capacities are needed, and are your buckets full? Next slide, please. So here is what we boiled down to be the primary capacities needed to successfully manage a grant. And that is, and actually in many ways, this is applying to federal grants because you wouldn't really need that component of technical and contractor management so much with the Ohio EPA program. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you are looking for federal grants, this is what is needed. Next slide, please. Outreach, planning, and communication capacity. You don't have to reinvent a wheel. If you have a wheel, maybe you don't have a wheel. How do you get the word across to a community about what is going on in your community? Do you have someone that does that on a regular basis? Do you have someone that maybe they're not the media expert, but they're really good at talking to neighborhoods, talking to the community residents? Are you able to identify and form partnerships with organizations that make your project successful? So think about that. Have you identified stakeholders? Do you have a plan? And that's really important. And it doesn't have to be a master plan necessarily, but it's great to have a land use plan. It could be a downtown revitalization plan. It could be you're adopting a county plan, but you need your development project to align with that. And think about the outreach you've done in the past. Build upon those strengths. How have you reached out? Have you identified your stakeholders? And the typical stakeholders can be neighboring residents, businesses, neighborhood associations, downtown districts, development entities, economic development folks. Who benefits from the revitalization? Who is involved? Who is impacted by, let's say, future field work? Who's involved by future construction? So do you have that capacity? If not, you certainly have come to the right place. The TAB program, KSU TAB program, and Ohio EPA have ways to help you build that bucket. Or you may want to rely on a larger entity, let's say a county, a regional district. There's other ways to partner up and still get to where you want to go. Next slide, please. And outreach capacity. As I mentioned earlier, identify your cheerleader. You can work with KSU TAB to initiate workshops. Really good at that, helping you identify who those stakeholders might be. It begins with you. Your goal is to encourage input from the community and identify partners that are critical to you, critical to the quality of your project down the road. Work with KSU TAB and also work with Ohio EPA. And I believe Roxanne may have some comments on this.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to point out a few things. One, having a cheerleader, your cheerleader does not have to be knowledgeable about brownfields or have experience in brownfields. All they have to do is have the ability to be persistent and persevere. Someone who's going to take a project through to completion, because sometimes these can be in for the long haul. Some of these processes can take a little bit longer than you intended. So just somebody who's going to stick with it and can be a contact is really all you need for that. I also want to mention, like, as far as creating those partnerships, we can help you connect to some of those partnerships. There are a lot throughout the state, on the regional level, local level, and state level that can help you through that process. So if you don't know where to start with finding someone who can kind of guide you or to collaborate with on a grant, both TAB and the Ohio EPA can help you do that. And then I want to reiterate that the EPA can be the first stop to help you with where to go or what to do first if you don't even know where to start on a project. And as far as creating grant capacity, the great thing about our program is that it is the easiest way to get into that, because you don't have to hold the grant. You don't have to have the contractor. We do all of that process for you. So you can kind of see how it goes before you do it yourself.
Oh, wow. That's excellent, Roxanne. Thank you. And think of those other logical partners within your community. Let's say like the other departments, public works, community development, your planning, economic development, public safety, transportation. They can also be very integral to the success of your project. Next slide, please. And if you really want to kind of look into if your community is ready, the KSU tab has a tool that helps communities and tribes identify what their strengths are and areas for growth. This is really good for communities that want to start tracking their progress and increasing their brownfields capacity over time. Next slide, please. And community engagements. You have many, many partners in the grant project. As I mentioned earlier, Ohio EPA is certainly one of those partners. Government partners also like Ohio Development, Historic Preservation, health departments, they're key. USDA can be a partner, HUD, CDBG, those programs can support your revitalization efforts. Workforce development, they're as invested in a project that creates jobs as you are in that project bringing in tax revenue. Next slide, please. And so tab assistance to community and tribes, we do strategic planning and reuse visioning, and we do it over the long haul as well. We're working in a community where we've been working with them on community outreach, very EJ type of community. And we've been involved with that project since February of 2022. And a lot of that has been just to get to know who the players are, who will listen, who can get the message out, just like Roxanne said. Don't have to be that technical guru because sometimes they really don't help. It's really more that person that can connect with the community and provide simple messages about what's going on. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned before, we specialize in building outreach input programs geared towards rural and or disadvantaged communities. And that's a tough nut to crack many times because many times in the rural setting, everyone's spread out or you can't really, there's no network necessarily. So those are things that we assist you with helping develop. And then the disadvantaged communities, you've got to figure out ways to get them to the table to interact. Next slide, please. And then the reuse visioning. And that's something actually during a community I was working with that we had, it was a small group there. Well, not really that small. It was a small community, but there were probably 20 people at the meeting, including the mayor. And the mayor had this great idea that the property was going to be, you know, another manufacturing site in their neighborhood. Well, they didn't want anything to do with that. So we started a visioning process, and this isn't the vision we came up, it was a different one. But it was basically, they really felt like a brewery was a great place. They had a local developer, and all the pieces fit into place. And it's amazing that leaders many times don't have that connection to the residents. So it's really good to get that community input. And I think Roxanne had some comments on this as well.
So all I have to really say about this and what you kind of went through is that the Ohio EPA also has funds to assist in reuse plans, visioning plans, brownfield inventories, and even area-wide plans. But more importantly, when you want to do projects like this or things that you need to kick off, it doesn't have to be either the Ohio EPA or TAB. A lot of times we work in conjunction with each other and work together on a project to see who is better suited for the task at hand. TAB has a wealth of knowledge and a lot of skill sets that we try and connect communities to, but it's not one or the other. We can work together, and a lot of times you just need to talk to us to see what funding is best used for your project.
Yes, and we've even we've added more partners to what our activities are. We have one partner that is in the planning, reuse visioning, the economic development side, really focuses on very small and rural communities. We have another partner that focuses mainly on environmental justice issues, large population, let's say Hispanic, or let's say other types of disadvantaged environmental justice type populations. So these are things that to be thinking about as you're considering what you're doing in your community. Next slide, please. And the visioning services, this is rendering for a very small neighborhood group that was applying for a state grant. And they got the state grant because they had the vision, they had the rendering, they had ideas on what might be suitable for development, what wasn't. Next slide, please. And now we're on to Amy. And Amy is going to go over the financial management bucket. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, thank you, Beth. The last two buckets, your outreach bucket that Beth went over with help from Roxanne, it really encompasses a lot of things that you need to think about, planning that you need to do. So I'll cover the last two buckets a little bit shorter, but also very important, and things that you need to consider and be ready for if you want to manage a federal Brownfields grant. Financial management capacity, questions you want to ask. Has your organization managed and complied with other state or federal grant programs? The state ones may be different than the federal. Sometimes federal requires a bit different, a bit more reporting, and often a little bit, just different as far as what they're requiring and how you draw down funds. And that gets to the next one. Has your organization had the in-house experience and capacity to review contractor invoices? Something to keep in mind is oftentimes contractor invoices can be technical in nature, and your particular office for your community may not have that experience. Also making payments and drawing down grant funds from ASAP, which is US EPA's automated grant payment system. And, it's just a matter of getting some experience and maybe some training in doing that. Next slide. So talk to communities with experience, talk to people that know things about federal grants. There's probably a regional planning organization or a county that your community's in that may have already received a federal Brownfields grant, and they can help you learn and be comfortable with those requirements. And again, as I mentioned, the financial managing and reporting requirements up between state and federal can be different. We may be able to, as KSU TAB, provide you with contacts, communities that we know in your area have successfully managed grants and have used ASAP successfully. And in addition to that, Ohio EPA may be aware of that, and your EPA project officer may also be aware of that. And I'm going to pass you on to a project officer, Melanie, and you may want to mention a few things about this particular topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment regarding the first bullet point on the slide, the part that says partnering with a local or regional entity that has experience with Brownfields grants. Now, this is where US EPA's coalition assessment grants can really help you guys out here. They're specifically set up to help small and low capacity communities tap into those US EPA Brownfields assessment funding. So that lead coalition member has to be one of those big entities. If you remember, that's the state, county, tribe, regional council, or the group of general purpose units of governments. And that non-lead members have to be either that they've never received a federal Brownfields grant, or they have received one, but it has been closed in 2014 or earlier. And if you would be interested in forming an assessment coalition, I highly suggest you reach out to your county or your regional development or finance organizations to see whether they might be interested in helping you. And if you have any questions or just would like to brainstorm, please feel free to reach out to me. That's all I had on that point.
All right. Thanks, Melanie. And that is just a wonderful point, and one I probably should have put in there. I'm glad you brought that up. And not just from the financial management part of it, but just all the experiences that Beth and I, with some input from Roxanne, have been talking about today. Getting into a coalition grant can really help you develop those experiences and get you in a good position, not only to use that grant, but also to manage and apply for and manage future grants in the federal Brownfield program. Next slide. So there are trainings and recorded webinars that EPA offers, and I do know that I do believe they update them periodically, and they are specifically targeted to help applicants and manage their cooperative agreements and manage the financial aspects of them. These might be certain. The first one may be more targeted toward whoever your treasurer, county treasurer, city treasurer, whoever handles your financials, and would be handling, drawdowns from the grant. It tells you how to successfully enroll in ASOP and draw down accounts and make adjustments and submit financial reports. Again, EPA, and then probably more of a little bit of a general training. This is more grant applicants or grant recipients. That way they can know the key aspects of the grant cycle from preparation through grant closeout. So these could be, that one can actually be a good one. We talk about doing things sooner rather than later, just to get yourself prepared before that fall grant round starts for the EPA grants. That sort of training would probably be a very helpful one for folks to take. And again, as I mentioned, checking with, if you've got questions that come up, checking with your project officer, EPA project officer, once you're a grant recipient, they are a really good resource as well. Next slide. So now we're talking about our technical and contractor management capacity bucket, our last bucket there, and another very important one. And that really gets to your technical ability to prepare an RFP, a request for proposal, or in some areas they call it request for qualification, RFQ, to procure a environmental consultant. And this is a very, very important part of the project, and something that you probably need to get aware of before, applying for a grant. Get aware with some of the requirements and some of the things you need to know, because that is one of the first activities you will have to do once you receive a grant. We want to know if you've got that technical ability, or you want to ask yourself, and also the resources to work with your state or your federal project manager, such as Melanie or Carla, including things like reviewing technical reports, generating required progress reports. So technical reports, this may be something as a community, you may not have anyone there specifically that has a lot of knowledge of environmental type reports or, procuring an environmental contractor. Moving on, and I'll also mention, once you get that capacity, there are some additional things as far as following federal procurement regulations. There are regulations to make sure that you have fairly reviewed and considered and selected an environmental consultant that the federal government requires before you actually are able to hire that person or select that person. So we'll talk about that as well. If we could move on to the next slide. So getting experience. This is kind of similar to what I discussed before with the financial management, drawing upon the experience from your county or regional entities. Again, as Melanie said, getting involved in a coalition grant is obviously a very good way to get yourself started on that. And that way you can learn from people that have had a lot of experience and can share their, the goods and bads, the ups and downs of going through this process. They also will have, if you're doing this on your own, they'll likely have examples of good RFPs or RFQs. And we can actually, as KSU TAB, provide you some assistance with scope. Basically the scope of the project and assist you with actually developing that RFP or RFQ and evaluation criteria. Once you get a team together and you're evaluating these particular responses to your RFP or RFQ. We can also help with reviewing, and that is looking at very specific things such as experience the contractor has or doesn't have. Have they worked with the voluntary action program? If you're in Ohio, what kind of experience do they have with that? What kind of experience, if you're going for a federal grant, do they have working with, EPA grants, Brownfield grants? So all of this is very important and things that you can, like I said, rely on or go to your either KSU TAB, Ohio EPA, or your county, or maybe regional planning or regional economic development agency. Next slide. Another thing we have, again, you want to borrow on that experience from others, but there is also an assistance, a guide that will help you in writing requests for proposals. So just making sure you have those key elements, experience, what's their safety record, what is their experience working with the BAP or with, Brownfields cleanup grant or Brownfields assessment grant. And here's the link for the guide. Again, you'll get these slides, so you'll be able to access that. Next slide. So the importance of a well-written RFP. If it's a good written RFP, your chances of getting a good consultant or contractor are a lot higher than if you've missed things. And some of those things that you really want to have and really want to have detailed in your RFP as far as what information you want from that consultant in their response is very important. The scope, you wanted them to, want to know what kind of experience they have in doing the type of investigation or cleanup that you're going to be looking at, and as part of your grant, guidance or grant contract, essentially with Ohio or with US EPA. You also want to know about their qualifications. We've already talked about that. Experience, we've talked about that. Company insurance, make sure that they are insured properly. There are certain insurance requirements that consultants have, and there's also ones that are really helpful. What if they make a bad decision? is that covered if they didn't sample in the correct area, or something wasn't cleaned up in the manner that your grant is requiring? Are they going to be covered under that? You don't want to be charged for that. And then your evaluation criteria. It's important to develop some really good evaluation criteria so that when you're reviewing all these RFP responses, that you understand and can really manage that well and determine who your good consultants are and who may not be able to do the job. Next slide. Okay, best approaches for gaining experience. Make time to learn. Ask lots of questions. That's just kind of goes with the territory. You are, you're not the expert in that area, I assume, and so there's don't be afraid to ask questions about everything that they're doing or will be doing. Draw upon your organization's experience managing infrastructure projects and their infrastructure type budgets. So your wastewater treatment plant operators, your engineers, your city clerks or treasurers who have managed those types of grants for the engineers and wastewater treatment plant, they're going to be much more familiar with the technical aspects and technical requirements of certain grants. Maybe not environmental, but certainly similar type grants. Also, they may be excellent people to have on your review team once you're reviewing these RFP responses. And take OSHA training courses. This is a really good thing to do. Not only does it protect your safety while you're out there, you want to make sure that you're safe, but that way you can say, why is that person out there without a hard hat and, safety boots when that's being required on the property? And, why is this person who's got a white suit on and safety glasses, supposedly to protect her, not wearing gloves when she's taking a sample? So these are the sorts of things that having that type of training is going to make you more comfortable with being out on the site and overviewing what that consultant is doing and whether they're doing it appropriately. Next slide. So again, lots of questions. Here's some of the ones we mentioned. Lots of detail. Ask them why the activities cost what they do. Don't be hesitant to do that. You want to know. Explain reports in your phase 1 reports, databases, maps, things like that. Why are they looking at Sanborn maps, which are your old fire maps from way back, in the early and mid 20th century? What's that? What's the reason for that? Should I be wearing a white suit? Again, getting to safety. If everybody on the site is wearing a white suit and you come out and they walk you out onto the site, why am I not having a white suit on? Is that a problem? And of course, the last one is the most important. Why are you over budget and why wasn't I informed? So just make sure that you ask a lot of cost questions and that sort of thing to make sure that whoever you are selecting or have selected are doing the right job. Next slide. One of the requirements is updating the assessment cleanup and redevelopment exchange system, US EPA's ACRES database. Grant reporting such as ACRES, there's also some financial recordings as well. It does require, periodic reporting, and it's very important that that is done appropriately and everything's covered when the grant is closed out. You can ask your environmental consultant to help you with some of that or to actually do most of it, because a lot of it has to do with the work that they're going to be performing. And that can be put in the scope for your RFP. Don't overlook the training classes, though. do get trained in acres, whether you ask your consultant to do that reporting work in acres or not. Because remember, it's ultimately your responsibility. It's not the consultant's. You are the grant recipient. So you want to have working knowledge of acres. If they're putting the information in, you want to oversee it. You want to check it and make sure it's being done right. Again, KSU tab, we can provide you with scopes of work, as we've mentioned, and that will, help you in, in writing up things if you do want to get certain reporting done by your consultant that you select for the request for proposal. And there again is your acres web link. And that will give you information on how that system works and how you report into it. Next slide. Excuse me. Competitive procurement, that is that box when you were seeing my flow chart earlier, that is a requirement of not only US EPA, but the federal government. They have certain federal procurement requirements. And there is a best practices guide at that web link that will go through that and let you know what EPA expects. Sometimes the different agencies, and EPA is one of them, may have some requirements that are just a little bit more stepped up than what the federal government requires. So make sure that you are aware and you look at that best practice guide. And this is important when you are hiring a consultant, because that's going to probably be your biggest grant expense. So that is going to be something that falls under the the federal procurement procedures. And the basically, one of the things you want to make sure that you're doing is that you are following, and making sure not only are you looking at these people that are responding to your RFP appropriately and equally, but that you're also including some of the previously considered disadvantaged workers, such as minority business, women business. So another thing I will mention here, because it has come up and it is covered in, at least it was in the FY23 guidance for the US EPA Brownfield grants. And that is, if you hire someone that is going to help you write your grant, and you're also going to use them for the assessment or cleanup or whatever project is in your scope of work, that is okay. It is not, it's not encouraged, but it is okay. However, you need to make sure when you hire that person, because that's going to be before you actually get the grant, that you are following these competitive procurement procedures. So if that is something that you are thinking about, make sure that you're talking to EPA, and Carla or Melanie would be good ones to give you information and pass you on to anyone else that might be able to walk you through that. You don't want to be in a situation where you aren't meeting those requirements. And then next slide. So reviewing your RFP responses or RFQ responses, you need to select a review team. So make sure that you've got somebody that, you've got folks that are good at reviewing detail. Also, I mentioned, maybe your county or city engineer, or someone that's running your wastewater treatment plan, people that are used to maybe dealing with grants that are technical in nature would be a good part of your review team. And there are some things such as the cost and experience that are weighted. And that is something that US EPA in their best practices guide, and also they have like a 2-page really nice fact sheet that Beth will be talking about later. We'll go over, and help you through as far as, you want to put this percentage on the cost, or, what they're asking for, this percentage on this particular experience component. that sort of thing. That's going to be something that US EPA is going to want to see. So the guide, again, as I mentioned, that's something that Beth will talk about. It's also going to be under resources tab for this webinar. And if your community doesn't have much or any experience conducting technical reviews, again, tab can assist you. And they'll be looking at things as such as a contractor's experience with respect to the scope of work, working with your state, your state's voluntary cleanup program, and their safety record, among other things. Next slide. Okay, so I have or I can achieve the capacities needed to apply for an EPA grant. What's next? Look at the Brownfields grants that are available. Look at this website, and it'll talk about types of EPA Brownfield grant funding. Pay attention to the assessment grants and cleanups grants, a little bit to the multi-purpose, but as Melanie said, you probably want to, if you're doing it on your own, for the first time, assessment and cleanup is what you want to pay special attention to and see if those are going to meet the needs for your project and your community. And then register for Ohio EPA's grant writing webinar. We've mentioned that before. It's the 26th and 27th of July. It is not posted just yet, but it probably will be in the next few weeks. So use that tab and that will take you to all the different webinars. And once that is posted, please do actually register for that. It's very helpful. Next slide. And going for it. Other things you can do along with attending that webinar, review last year's grant guidelines and the frequently asked questions. They're really helpful. They give a lot of information. And they are, you know, there's a ton of FAQs, but they are separated by, you know, subject matter. So if there's certain things that you have questions about, you can go right to that subject and they'll provide you with a lot of good information. And look at recent successful grant proposals. The successful grant applications for actually FY23 have just been posted. So you can look at those. They actually post all the grants, and it's in a table on US EPA's Brownfields website, and it will give you all kinds of, whether they've received the grant, how much they received, and a link to their actual grant application. And again, as Beth mentioned, Tab EZ. It's good way to make sure that you don't miss anything, any of the requirements of the grant. It's updated every year for the upcoming, once the grant guidelines are out, and it's easy to use. And with that, I am going to pass this back to Beth, I think.
Well, actually, no, I just want to make the comment that I did put the link for the funding 23 grants, and those are successful and non-successful grants. But you can take a look. Maybe it looks like a community that has a similar project. How did they handle it? That's all I've got, Amy.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. Any questions anyone has? I know that the chat box was kind of moving, but anything I'm missing, Beth, or?
No, I think we covered the links, and I think, let's see, Roxanne mentioned that we'll talk about successful grants in the workshop in July. So
wonderful.
I think we're covered.
Wonderful. Well, with that, then Beth and I will step off and pass this on to Crystal Lorimar, who's going to talk about her experiences with, working through a grant and getting grant capacity. So on to you, Crystal, and thank you.
Thanks, Amy. I'm Crystal Lorimar, the Executive Director of the Community Improvement Corporation in Belmont County. And we are far eastern part of the state, for those of you who are not familiar. And in 2020, the Ohio EPA reached out to me. They had received a technical assistance grant on behalf of Belair, small village, 3,000 people, to do a brownfield inventory. And they asked, could I kind of be the boots on the ground, so to speak, to help implement that grant. Belair, Ohio, for those of you who are not familiar, it's right along the Ohio River. Our area was historically steel, coal. Belair had glass factories, Imperial Glass, if you're familiar with that, hailed from Belair, and there's a museum there. And Belair has seen better days. It's kind of the underdog in the county. A lot of people, in fact, a couple weeks ago, I even had somebody say to me, gee, Crystal, I had written Belair off years ago, and look what they're doing. So they didn't have a very good reputation, a lot of sad nicknames for them. And so when Dan and Roxanne approached me, I said, okay, let's try it. And I had no experience with the Brownfields before that. So if you are new to this, here's a little bit of reassurance, hopefully. So next slide, please. So to give you just an idea, the scope for the grant that Ohio EPA had received, they chose a section of Belair, the downtown area, downtown business district. And this is, I've got a couple slides to show you what it looks like. The picture on your right there, that's actually just an empty shell. There are trees growing inside of it. And the picture on the left, broken windows, that's typical. Empty lots. A couple years ago, they had two buildings in the town collapse. It's a challenging space. State Route 7 used to go through this area. And then 20 years ago, after, industries leaving and so forth, so that hit Belair. But then State Route 7 was also rerouted. So now it goes actually between Belair and the Ohio River. So that also impacted these businesses because now they didn't have the traffic that they once did. Even so with all this, next slide, please. Just show you a couple more pictures. Again, empty buildings, empty lots, boarded up windows. Next slide, please. But even among all of this, Flanagan's there on the right, that is a restaurant bar that's hoping to do some renovations. But there are still two restaurants in this downtown district that have been there for over 90 years. There's a hardware store in this in Belair that's been there for over 90 years. So there are bright spots in this town, but unfortunately they were overlooked way too often. There's actually a running shoe store that's been there over 25 years that beat out all the big chain stores for the Hoka contract, if any of you know running shoes, between Pittsburgh and Morgantown. So they're the only ones with that Hoka contract between Pittsburgh and Morgantown, which is huge. So they have people coming from all over to that little running shoe store. So back when Dan and Roxanne contacted me, we first went to the village council and to talk to them. And as I'm sure many of you are used to, when you are in these small towns, the village council members, they're part-time. They don't have the experience in the economic development, community development, or brownfields. So it was very a challenge to kind of get them to understand what a brownfield inventory was and what we were trying to do. And then COVID hit. So the idea of doing public meetings was stopped. And so we ended up having to put a survey online, which actually ended up working out great for us. So go ahead to the next slide, please. And will this let you play? It doesn't look like, okay. So this is one of the videos that we put out, and it highlights it has music in real life, but for some reason that's not playing, and that's okay. That's the section of Blair that we highlighted. And we wanted input in this survey from people, from the residents, from the businesses, from people that visited Blair. We were asking them how they were using this downtown space and how they would like to use it. So we put this survey, this was an online survey. We put this video out on Facebook, social media, restaurants restaurants would put table toppers on their tables with a link to the survey. So their customers could go directly to the survey. Pizza shops put flyers on their pizza boxes. Stores put flyers in the storefronts, just trying to get the word out to have people do the survey. So we ended up with well over 300 people completing the survey. And again, I'm a one-person shop. I could not have done this without the Ohio EPA. They did this, or they hired this done to have the video made. They worked with creating the survey. I could not have done that alone. But with them, it was a great partnership because they were able to pick up what I could not do. But then I was here in town giving feedback to them. Okay, this might work, this might not work. You know, here, let's try this angle and that type of thing. So when you do the survey, you need that champion, you need that cheerleader. So we did Zoom meetings, invited business, because we weren't getting a lot of great response from the council members. We decided to go to the business owners because they've got skin in the game, right? They want their town to succeed. So, and that was a great move on our half, because those business owners took it, ran with it. They promoted the survey, like I said, and then when the results came in, go ahead and go to the next screen, please. We shared the results with them, and we explained that this result we did a brownfield inventory and a vision plan. So with the survey in the background, the contractors are doing the brownfield inventory in this area that was outlined in yellow in that video. And then we were doing this survey to kind of create, okay, what would you all like to see in this area? And this is just a summary, just an example there for you of like what the people told us. And then we told the folks, okay, now this is the kind of stuff, now you can use this to apply for more grants. You have your vision plan. It was over a 400-page document, the final result, with sketches of what people like, what they would like to see, and so forth. So it ends up being a great tool for them to even refer back to kind of keep them in focus. The business leaders started, the Chamber of Commerce in Blair went defunct a few years ago. The business owners started getting together and saying, okay, how can we help one another? A lot of the business owners actually live right outside of town, outside of the corporation limit, so they can't even vote. So they don't have a say. So they've all banded together and say, okay, we want to be able to have a voice. So if we need something or want something, we can go to the village council and say, this is what we'd like to see. They now meet once a month. And the mayor actually comes to their meetings and says, and asks, what do you need? What do you need from me? What do you need from the council? And that's been really good. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So one of the first things they did, they decided to have a business dash, and they really surprised themselves. And on the right there, you'll see the Belair Business Dash. It was a flyer, and participating businesses put their logos on, and then over a week's time, basically anybody could stop and visit. You didn't have to buy anything, but you had to stop into any of those locations and get a stamp. And then at the final day, you could submit it for a chance to win a gift basket. And all the businesses put in like gift cards and things like that for the gift basket. And it was over $800 worth. They surprised themselves because people were shocked. What do you mean? We have that many businesses? And then they started adding up, counting them. We have way more businesses than what's actually showing on the Belair Business Dash on that flyer. So that was a great experience. They surprised themselves with that, and it got them into each other's business. You know, sometimes you don't really have a reason to go into, or they've never stopped in. Now this gave them a reason and to find out what was actually there in their own town. And so they repeat that now. They do that. They've done that 2 years now, and they'll be doing that this year for the third. Last August, in the bottom picture, you'll see one of the shining pieces. Can you go back a slide, please? That if you see that the stone viaduct there, those arches, so that's a rail line above that. And it's called the Great Stone Viaduct. It was built in 1871. That is right next to this downtown area that we've been working on. So that's a huge piece. It's been in Silence of the Lambs movie, and so forth. So it's a great attraction. And then last fall, this is the Main Street that a lot of pictures of the buildings, dilapidated buildings, were taken along. But last August, this group of business owners decided to do a car show, and they had well over 170 cars, and it went from their park in the north end, 3 blocks long, down to this viaduct turn, and then the cars started on the way back. So that was a huge thing, and people who attended said they had tears in their eyes because they said, we haven't seen Belair like this in decades. And that was what their memories of the town. So they were all excited about that. They're doing that again this year. The business owners also went to Village Council and asked for a DORA, the designated outdoor refreshment area. On every block on this main street, there's a bar or like a VFW type thing. So they've all worked together to get this DORA in that space, so that then they can have that for events and so forth. So they've had one DORA event, and in August they'll have their second one. The mayor attends. They've got other groups involved. So I can't stress this enough, how important it is to get the church leaders attend their meetings. There's a group called the Citizens Alliance Group. It's just a volunteer group. They go around and pick up litter. If you had a chance to at least look at the summary of results, people said the area needs cleaned up, litter, painting. These folks clean up litter. They plant flowers. They pull weeds. They actually paint the curbs on the main street. It's an amazing, it really is amazing to see all these people getting involved. The school district is now involved. And then the Great Stone Viaduct has a nonprofit. They are involved as well. We also got PACE financing in the county, which, if you're not familiar with that, that's like an energy, can be used for energy financing projects. So I was hoping to get that because I've seen that work in some downtown revitalization projects where they need some gap financing. And the PACE financing can sometimes help with that. So, because it's the envelope of the building counts as that energy efficiency. So, really think outside the box of the groups that you want to get involved. Don't go to your typical groups all the time. They're not the ones necessarily with the ideas, or they're not, or it's the same old ideas. You ask this in the school district, ask those kids what they want to see, because they're the future. Get them involved with the dreaming. We were also able, right outside of this district is a hospital, and through the Ohio EPA, we were able to get an assessment, phase 1, phase 2 done there, and that was paid for through their grant program. And then because we had that done when the state opened the Brownfield program last year, we were able to get some money to do asbestos remediation in that hospital for a new owner, so that can be revitalized. Go ahead to the next screen, please. And on the right, that's one of the drawings that was in the vision plan of how that space around the Great Stone Viaduct could be used. The group Belair actually was lead on an Appalachian community grant, and it's kind of revitalized their energy too on what they can go for, and they're looking at power grants. I partner with an organization called ECDI, Economic Community Development Institute, headquartered main office in Columbus, but they've got offices Cleveland, Akron, Portsmouth, Cincinnati, and we partnered for an ARC, Appalachian Regional Commission Power Grant. So we bring in like the entrepreneurship piece of this, trying to, as we slowly get the buildings renovated and so forth, then we can get entrepreneurs, and working with the school to get entrepreneurs to get those small mom and pops to fill that those storefronts. Some things that are coming up next, hopefully remediation of the Great Stone Viaduct. They had a trail, walking trail completed. They've had the first phase of their project done. It's beautiful. And so now there's a next phase that was a pipe yard. So we need to remediate that brownfield space so it can be turned into a park or some other type of thing. The village council is also looking at ordinances for vacant buildings. So, if your building is just sitting there vacant, you're not trying to renovate, you're not trying to rent it, you're not trying to sell it, there could be fines. And that's being modeled after a lot of other towns in Ohio, what they're doing. We're talking to the property owners. That brownfield inventory gives us something then that the village council members and the mayor can talk to the property owners and say, hey, you're sitting on a potential brownfield. Let us help you. Let's do some assessment. Right now, I've got 2 potential assessment projects going that to remediate. One would be to redevelop and one would be to demolish. So that's exciting. And we've also got a meeting scheduled coming up, talk to an expert about historical preservation, about some federal opportunities, what they can do for some of these downtown buildings that need a lot of help. We have some land or property owners that seem to buy one piece, buy a building, and then they say, well, it's expensive to renovate. Well, but they keep buying, and they need to start putting some money into properties they have instead of continuing to buy. And I also have 2 other towns next to this who also want to do vision plans, so, and brownfield inventory. So hopefully we'll be able to get this whole stretch along the Ohio River at least moving in the right direction. It's not going to change overnight, but as I tell everybody in Belair, it didn't get this way overnight. It won't change overnight. But go ahead, next slide, please. But I can't tell you, I don't have the capacity to do any of this by myself. I could not have done this without the Ohio EPA. I always I take a step and I'm like, okay, now what do I do? Always feel free to call Dan and Roxanne. They're huge help. I've called them and just totally lost. What do I do? And so I cannot speak highly enough of the partnership with them. They're a huge resource for you, and will tell you what's out there or what's been done or give you ideas and things. And you've heard it in some of the other speakers say, the grassroots, go to those community, touch with them. Don't settle for the same groups that you've talked to before. People care, give them a chance, get them to dream. Some of these towns have really been hit hard, and they're almost scared to dream anymore, or they don't dream anymore because they're so knocked down. If you can get them it doesn't take much, just a few little wins really gets them going. And just take you in this whole process. Most of the time, all I can do is take one step. I have no idea when I take that step where the next one will be or where I'm going, but take a step. And the folks on this call today are there to hold your hand to help you, and make it happen. And the picture on the right there is the Great Stone Viaduct, and picture off their website where the trail, they now have a walking trail, and then hopefully that will lead to the downtown. So just take a step, use the information you've gathered today and the contacts you've learned about today, and reach out to them. So thank you. Are there any questions that I could answer? Thanks, Barb. Feel free to reach out to me if you need. I'd be happy to tell you what I know. I'm by no means an expert, but I would be happy to share any experiences that I've had.
Great, Crystal, thank you. This was such a wonderful presentation, and gosh, this town is really on a good road to success, and you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
I hope it continues. And certainly contact the Ohio EPA or us at TAB if you need anything else. And a wonderful way to cover how you can successfully get through this as a small town and new to Brownfields redevelopment. We're going to start talking about resource documents. And Roxanne, I think you're up as far as talking about the first document, which is the common Brownfield funding resources. I will mention that each of these documents is under the resource tab under the where you registered for this webinar under our Kansas State University tab website. So all of these will be posted, and you can download all of them and use them as you feel they would be helpful. So I'll pass this on to Roxanne.
Okay, thank you guys. To wrap up, like Amy mentioned, we're going to discuss the documents that puts most of the information that you learned today at your fingertips. So there's a first time for everything, and if your community is new and seeking out Brownfields funding, you learned this morning that there's a lot to consider when pursuing a Brownfields grant, particularly one of the US EPA Brownfield grants that can pay for things such as property investigations and site cleanups. Crystal kind of went over that you can use vision planning and Brownfield inventories to kind of set your community up to be competitive for those types of grants. You learned about the services, guidance documents, fact sheets, and examples that are out for you to access. Many of the resources listed are really helpful, and we're just going to go over a few of those today. The one that I'm going to go over is available online, and it is just a kind of a chart that lists the state and federal grants that are the most popular, what you need to identify them, what type of funding is available, who is eligible, and what capacities you need to hold them. And so that's just a document that you can use to reference. And of course, if it gets confusing for you, you can always reach out to us for clarification. And then I think Amy and Beth are going to go over a few of theirs that are also listed.
Yeah. So if you could go to the next slide about resource documents. So as Roxanne kind of introduced this, there is a first time for everything, and don't despair. We have documents. We have help from Ohio EPA, US EPA, and TAB, and you've learned about a lot of our services, a lot of the guidance documents, a lot of the fact sheets, a lot of the web links that you can access for help, as well as calling us directly. So we're going to actually talk about a little bit more than 2 documents. Beth has a few others to cover, but I am going to talk about 2 documents, and there's the web link, and I think Beth put it in the chat to cover all the additional resource documents that we're providing today, that hopefully you'll be able to use as you get ready for applying for Ohio EPA or US EPA grants. Next slide. Okay, I know this is very hard to read. I just wanted to put it out there so when you're downloading documents, you'll know what it looks like. This is actually a checklist, and it kind of walks you through, what capacities you have, or if you don't have them, where you need to go, who you need to contact, what web link you need to go to get those capacities. And it's pretty much mirrors the presentation Beth and I did with the Are Your Buckets Full, and what you need to gain those capacities. So it's just in a checklist form, asks you some things like, do you have the technical ability to review technical documents and invoices from your consultant? And if yes, great. If no, here are the things to consider and places to go to get that information, or who to contact. So that is your checklist document. Kind of puts the presentation in a checklist type form. If that is helpful to you, we all know everybody learns and gets to things in familiarization and understanding in different ways. So if the checklist works better than reviewing the presentation, we're hoping you'll use it. Next slide, please. And this is FAQs, also kind of similar to the checklist. However, it covers things more specific to the grants themselves. So we start out with some of the Ohio EPA and Ohio Department of Development grants. And we have the links to all of those. We discuss who is eligible to be an applicant, and how to determine if you're eligible or not. Like, are you a responsible party? That might be an issue for a US EPA or an Ohio EPA grant. So you can go to a web link that will help you make that determination. Same thing with the federal grants, who's eligible, and how to determine if you're eligible. If there's a question, if you're a bona fide prospective purchaser, how do you know that? And that gives you links. It also provides links, and some of these things we'll go into in more detail during our webinar on grant writing, on the July 26th, 27th dates for the grant writing webinar. And those are things like, outreach. Do you have a target area in mind? How to be thinking about those things ahead of time before the grant guidelines come out? Have you conducted, a phase 2 investigation? If you're looking at a cleanup grant, is it a complete phase 2? Different things like that. And so this also gives some good web links and good things to consider as you're preparing to write a grant. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to Beth, who will talk about a few more resources.
Okay, and shame on me because I didn't include in my slides information about the, and you can go to the next slide here, but information about the the National Brownfields Training Conference in Detroit this year in August. I'll put a link in the chat when we're done here, but you can just do a search for it. But this is a great way if you have a project, you have questions, you want to know about eligibility of a site, you're going to have EPA right there. And it's not too far. Detroit's not that far. And it's a great conference. If you've never been to one, most people that I know that have gone again and again and again. It's every phase of brownfields that you want to learn about. Plus you get to meet, you know, some of the other folks that are very involved in brownfields redevelopment. It's a great way to network with other communities across the nation. So this is the guidance that I put on the resources tab, and it's really I liked it because it's 2 pages, and you can always go for more information. And I don't know if Carla, I know you've joined us. Did you have any thoughts on the guidance for procuring a contractor for EPA or federal grants?
We have you're catching me cold here, Beth. Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
We have a guide for procurement with federal regulations. I think that's listed on your list there.
Yes.
What it does is it lays out like the different types of federal procurement, and that's all based on like what you have to do to comply with the federal guidelines is based upon what how big your contract's going to be. If your contract's less than $10,000, then you can just do a simplified acquisition where it's almost like going out and getting a bid to get work done for your house. You just get three bids and you know, make your best decision. And then if your grant's going to be up to 200, or your award's going to be up to $250,000, it's a little more formal, but you don't have, you still need to get bids, and you still just need to keep the documentation of how you solicited your contractor in your files, but you don't necessarily have to do like sealed bids, and the posting of the solicitation of the contractors doesn't have to be as strict. And then if your contract's going to be over $250,000, which for the bigger assessment grants, oftentimes the contracts will be more than that. That's when you have to do sealed bids. But even if you get an assessment grant from US EPA that's say a $500,000 assessment grant, if you hire more than one contractor, the contract for each of those contractors is not going to necessarily be over $250,000. So, you know, the guidelines, like I said, the procurement guidance that we offer is very, very clear, very it's very methodical. It's laid out in a very methodical way, and you know, both TAB and US EPA can help you understand that guidance document. Hopefully that answered your question, Beth.
Oh, it sure did. And I'm sorry to catch you off guard like that.
Oh no, you didn't get me off guard. It was just the name of the document. Of course, as soon as you ask me, I forget it. You know that. But anyway, yes.
Not a problem. So that's basically what is posted here, and there's a more detailed guidance that's terrific as well. I just like the 2-pager. It just, for me, it's something easy to reference. Next slide, please.
Beth, can I also interject briefly?
Oh, absolutely.
You mentioned the Brownfield, the National Brownfield Conference. I wanted to let everyone know that for small communities and individuals who want to go, the Brownfield Conference also offers scholarships that you can apply for to fund your trip there. So I would check that out if you're interested. I
hope they're still doing that. I'll need to look into that because they had a deadline, but
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, let me double check.
But if not this year, maybe next time, but there is one available.
Okay, and this is just something, this little cheat sheet is something that I put together. It was not issued by the EPA, But basically, I was just summarizing the grants as of last year, the funding year 23, Brownfield grant guidelines, and it's just covered cost, eligible entities, all the different requirements that you might want to check out before you start looking into these grants. And this gives you the opportunity to maybe choose a type of grant that you might want to go for if you're going for EPA, and then take a look at those examples that are online that are successful. That might give you a better idea. And just because they're unsuccessful grants, some of these, they're still very good. It's a very, very tough competition. And so just a word to the wise, you know, keep that in mind, because you've got amazing resources at the Ohio EPA. I really encourage you, you know, leverage your successes with the Ohio EPA, with maybe a grant from the federal EPA. Next slide, please. And questions and wrap up. I believe we've answered questions, but this is your time. Please go. One thing that I think is really important, if you have a site, a project in mind, it's really good to run this by Ohio EPA. And if you're going for a federal grant, federal EPA Brownfields grant, then you might want to give Carla a call if you're looking at cleanup. This is something to know if you're going, you need to have eligibility for the site itself. And Carla could take that to their legal eagles and they can figure out if something is eligible or not eligible. It's good to know that right now. You know, there's a lot of effort with these grants, so you want to go forward. Next slide, please. So, okay, evaluation. This is how we evaluate ourselves. It's based on your impressions. Any suggestions you have to make this better really, really helps us, and we really take them into account. So please help us with evaluations and your thoughts and your comments. How can we make this better? How can we make this more effective for your continuing education? Next slide, please. And so here are the questions that maybe you should think about now. And I think I brought a couple of them up already. But where is your brownfield? If you don't own the property, will site access be an issue? That's really difficult. If you can't get site access, you may want to look at other sites if you really can't get site access. Unless you have other ways to go around it, maybe, you know, it's a very unsafe property. I mean, there's some ways that communities and counties can do that, but look into it. Do you have an inventory of your sites? Have you talked about your sites with Ohio EPA? Is your site eligible? Determine the type of grant you're looking for. Maybe you really look closer at what Ohio EPA has to offer. And then there's more questions that will be discussed in detail during the next grant writing webinar, but don't wait, get started now. Do you have a redevelopment plan, or do you need to rediscover community plans in your area? Have you reached out to community residents, businesses, potential stakeholders? Do you even know who they are? These are the times to start brainstorming. And TAB is perfect for that, brainstorming, as well as the Ohio EPA. How much will your assessment or cleanup activities cost? This is something to think about. I mean, what do you need here? Do you need an assessment? Well, what's that going to cost? Again, let's go talk to Ohio EPA about things like that. They might be able to give you some thought on that, or they can actually hopefully do the project. Now, if you're applying for a federal grant, I still say Ohio EPA is a great way to get an idea of the cost. Maybe they could steer you towards that. or you maybe have discussions with consultants out there that do this type of work and get ideas from them. You'd be amazed how prices can really range very low and very high. So these are things you need to consider when you're thinking about your Brownfields budget. Next slide, please. So in closing, I do have, Melanie, please forgive me, but I do have Carla's contact information here on the slide. If you need information about eligibility or just want to brainstorm a project, this is the time that you talk to EPA about your project if you're going for a federal grant. Once the guidelines are out, they're not going to be able to discuss that with you. And then, of course, Roxanne and Dan, myself and Amy, and we all thank you today. And hopefully there are some questions. Hopefully we've answered questions. And with that, I think we'll end a bit early unless others have comments or thoughts. Okay, I'll take that as a no. All right, well, thank you, everyone. And it's been a pleasure having you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.